Holy City Center Radio. This is episode 333, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, January 24th, 2025. Yes, it is episode 333. Can't believe it's been that many episodes of this show. And I don't know if it's the cold, the snow / ice. It just won't seem to go away. And look, it hasn't been that long. And I've been through plenty of snowstorms, ice, sleet, blizzards, nor'easters when I used to live in Connecticut for the majority of my life. Although, holy crap, I'm just thinking I'm coming up on, I'm not too far away from being 50-50 between Connecticut and here. Anyway, my existential crises aside, it's the fact that South Carolina has no infrastructure whatsoever to handle snow, sleet, ice, and why would they? This very rarely happens. The last time we had anything close to this was, 7, 8 years ago now? So it's not a criticism of the state. It'd be silly to have a ton of equipment that rarely ever gets used. But because of that, things like when I lived in Connecticut, things would have been pretty normal. Like this storm was nothing. There may have been some like school delays or something, and but the plows would have been out there, salt on the roads, all that, and so I'm not used to being stuck inside during a snowstorm for more than a day tops. So I don't know if it's that, and getting over the the uniqueness of that first day. We're like, oh, it's kind of fun seeing snow and having like a snow day. Granted, I'm still doing work, but cozy in my house, and so maybe that's part of it. And a big chunk of it has just been this week in general, but not in the best of moods. And this is the episode that I have not been looking forward to, where I finally start talking about some national stuff. I'm not going to go into great detail, but just so many things are concerning, frustrating, maddening that have occurred. Couple that with being stuck inside, and despite my best efforts to avoid national news, it's impossible. When you're online as much as me and doing local news, you're going to come across all the national stories, and I do want to be informed, don't get me wrong. So this episode's not going to be a great one, because I think the majority of you agree with me. Not, I'm not saying it's not great, like I plan on doing a poor job. It's just not going to be fun. As we discuss some of the things, and part of me wants to say, hey, let's pace ourselves here. Every day can't be a crisis. Like 2016 to 2020 felt like every day there was something new and people were getting outraged, and sometimes it was warranted and sometimes it was like, all right, I mean, this isn't a great piece of news, but let's settle down here. But it's been a flurry of mostly executive orders and comments from other people, and there is so much that has been frustrating and concerning, including these confirmation hearings that are going on, and I can't even touch on all of it, but I'm going to touch on some headlines here. That's going to be the first part. Then we do have some local news as well. One is not fun for me, for sure, and I think a lot of you would agree with that as well. And the last story is an upgrade on the whole Sweetgrass vodka situation. When that's the most fun story that we're gonna have, it's not gonna be a super happy episode to get you in the weekend. So I'm just letting you know right off the bat. So if you're looking to avoid the Trump of it all and the MAGA of it all, I don't blame you. You can check out, fast forward. I get it. Like I said, I'm going to try not to dwell on it, but just kind of hit you with some of the biggest headlines that have been happening in case you've missed some, because it's been a lot. It's been a flurry, like I said, of executive orders and moves and announcements and things. But I don't blame you for wanting to skip ahead or skipping this episode for that matter. Don't miss the next one on Monday. Hopefully it'll be better. Before we do that, number one, I mentioned the weather. Most importantly, I hope you all are staying safe and staying warm. From what I've seen from news reports, it looks like everything's going okay. I haven't seen a lot of reports about accidents or, anybody being hurt or worse because they're stuck out in the cold or they lost heat or whatever it may be. So it seems things are going well in that sense. And I hope you're all doing okay, not getting too stir crazy in your homes if you've been unable to leave, because I know a lot of places just there's no snowplows and stuff, obviously. So unless you are doing your own work on your driveway in your street, chances are you haven't really been able to travel either. And I don't recommend it, especially if you have no experience with this kind of weather. But even those of us who do, this is not something you like to drive in, which is ice, icy conditions on the road, especially after, the sun goes down and some of the snow and ice that melted just refreezes. And there's something called black ice. For those who aren't familiar with that, it's a term that if you grow up anywhere where you get significant snow, you're familiar with. It basically just means when ice freezes on black asphalt, sometimes you don't see it as you're approaching it. You can't tell that there's ice on the road. And so you might be just motoring along at whatever the speed limit is, or even a little less. And you'll hit that patch and you could swerve and all that stuff. So just be careful. If you don't have to leave your home, please don't. And just stay safe out there. The last thing I'll say before we start talking about the news is the Best of Charleston nominations are closing up on Friday. So today will be your last chance to put your nominations in. You can do as few as just one category if you want, or you can do them all. But if you do decide to do some nominations, please consider Holy City Center and Holy City Center Radio for any categories that you think it would fit in. I greatly appreciate anyone who has done that or will do it. And I'll let you know when final voting begins, regardless if Holy City Center is a finalist or not in any of the categories. So again, today's the last day to do that. There's a link in the show notes to help you get there quicker. And with that, buckle up. Let's get into the news. All right. Inauguration Day was Monday. We all know that. Ratings have come back. It is, I think, the lowest ratings in terms of, the amount of people who watched it since, I don't know, I forget the exact year, but it's been several inaugurations past that had bigger ratings, including Trump's first inauguration. So prepare for those comments. I'm sure it was the most watched inauguration in history, just like he had the biggest inauguration crowd in history back in, well, technically 2017, since inauguration would have been in January of that year. So in addition to that, it was held inside. So there, a lot of people who, purchased tickets or traveled to DC were unable to take part because it was moved indoors. So there's that. And like most presidents on their first day, there's a bunch of executive orders that they sign. This is basically just a president can come in and there's a lot of stuff that they can say, hey, this is what's happening. And they don't need to go through Congress or anything else. And this happens all the time. And usually those first flurry of executive orders are, especially if there is a change in the party of who the president is, they're just undoing some things that the last administration did. When Biden came in, he did some executive orders that undid what Trump did. And now Trump's doing all that stuff. So there's a bunch of that's been going on. And yeah, some of it's not great. Some of it's just dumb. It's like not a big deal, but it's just stupid. And that's the first one, which is Trump says that the United States now will call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It's just dumb. Like, it's not a big thing in the grand scheme of things. It's just stupid. Obviously, we know it's rooted in this America first, nationalism, racism. We get that. It's funny, though, because this is the party of you can't change history. You shouldn't change the names of things just because you don't like it. Well, Gulf of Mexico is now the Gulf of America. What does that really mean? Not much. It means the government, if they're talking about it for whatever reason, they're going to refer to it as the Gulf of America. That's really it. I mean, there may be some companies who print maps or whatever that they might change it, but it really doesn't mean anything. Like I said, it's just dumb and it's just rooted in, outright nationalism. So there's that. In addition, the White House has taken down some websites that were running, including a reproductive rights website. It just completely shut that down. No surprise there, based on Trump being a Republican. Now, of course, reproductive rights doesn't always mean abortion, which A lot of those on the right are against, of course. It means all sorts of different things, but that doesn't matter. Website's down. Going back to this whole anti-Mexico racism nationalism thing, all the Spanish language White House websites have been taken down as well. Makes no sense. We have many legal citizens here who speak Spanish. Sorry if you don't like that, but they do. And it's just sad that they took that down. They also Trump also made some order saying the U.S. is only going to recognize two genders, male and female. Again, doesn't really mean anything right now. It's just stupid. Um, will that come into play later? Of course, there's going to be all sorts of anti-LGBTQ legislation, especially anti-trans legislation or blocking of rights and et cetera. This is just a signal of what's to come. But in and of itself, it's kind of like the Gulf of Mexico thing. It doesn't really mean anything. It is funny though, because just like, a lot of these abortion bans aren't actually rooted in science. Um, the part of this declaration about two genders in the US was that at conception, at conception, it's a male or female, end of story, no other options. But at conception, no one's a male. I mean, technically, no one's either, because it's just a group of cells, of course. But it takes some time in the process before you can determine if an embryo or whatever stage it's at is actually going to be born male or born female. So it's just funny that they, again, not rooted in science. At conception, there is no gender, and there is, especially the development of male chromosomes and stuff doesn't happen. Everyone's basically a female at conception. It's just funny the way they worded it and how that's what it came out to be, because they don't know the science. So it's just, they're trying to make a point about genders and then do something like that. In addition to that, Trump signed an executive order taking the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, a group of countries that were working together to try to curb climate change. Obviously, the climate's going to change regardless, but you can slow it down by taking certain measures, because humans can. And I know some people don't agree with that, but humans can speed up that process by some of the things that we do. So just like he did in his first term, he's removed the U.S. from that. He also signed an executive order removing the United States from the World Health Organization. Again, collective of countries that would work together when there's some kind of, like a pandemic, say. And so certainly there are some concerns there, hopefully, especially when it comes to the World Health Organization, we won't have any reason over these next 4 years that we really needed to be part of that. But with bird flu, being a little bit of a concern, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but there's talks about how it's spreading, and that's also contributing to the rise in cost of, say, eggs, because bird flu is spreading. So it would not be so great if we're not part of, the World Health Organization if something like that gets worse. So, all right, so there's that. There's two that I think are the most important. But before those two, this one's pretty important too. There's been some talk about putting an immediate halt on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Joe Biden and his administration passed. It was bipartisan, meaning both Republicans and Democrats voted for it, which has led to billions of dollars being spent around the country for things like improving roads and bridges, uh, you know, which is obviously needed. So in addition to kind of putting a halt to that, which would stop, any future projects from beginning, or, delegating any of the remaining money to projects, it also could stop projects that are already underway, which makes zero sense. You got projects underway, again, reinforcing bridges, repaving roads, making all sorts of different changes in all facets of infrastructure, that all of a sudden will stop and they will no longer have funding, which will then lead states, cities, counties, whatever, trying to find the money to complete these projects, or they're just going to sit there unfinished, which, depending on where they are on that process, could be just horrible for everyone involved. If there's some roads that are shut down indefinitely because they're already shut down because work's being done, but now they can't complete that work. So that could lead to all sorts of issues. But that one's kind of still up in the air. It wasn't like it was one of those things where Trump and his people say a lot of things. You don't always know if they're going to follow through on it. So that's one of them. But the two important things that happened, number one, he signed an executive order that basically said birthright citizenship is no longer a thing in this country. Birthright citizenship means if you were born in the United States, regardless of your parents' status, whether they are legal U.S. residents or not, you are American. You were born here. You're an American. They want to undo that. So besides the fact that you may just disagree, like, no, that should be a thing. If you're born here, you're an American. It's part of the U.S. Constitution. So this isn't just some law that he wants to repeal, or it's just some like, oh, this is like the thing we've done, but we don't really have anything written about it, nothing in stone. No, this is the 14th Amendment. This is part of our Constitution. So number one, an executive order can't do that. And there's already a court, or just before I started recording, that has decided to put a temporary hold on this declaration. The court said this is blatantly unconstitutional. So it took Trump less than a week from being inaugurated to try to do something that's unconstitutional. That's all it took. A handful of days. So it does not seem like this is going to go through. So it sounds, fight through the courts, whatever. If it's as clear as it seems to be to everyone else, it's not going to happen. It could happen if he followed proper procedure, which would be to go through Congress or call a constitutional convention, where you don't need to get into all that. The easier route would be going through Congress, but I think it's something along the lines you need 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to approve a change to the Constitution to make it happen. But then I think it's 2/3 as well of the states have to also ratify that change. And that's not going to happen. So part of it's like, he's just doing something. It's red meat for the base. It's clearly based in racism. It's all this anti-immigrant talk and this illegals are ruining everything talk. And, people are coming here just to have what they call quote unquote anchor babies. It's all part of that. And it might just be for show and it's not going to go anywhere. But it's going to earn him points with his base. And it's a Republican talking point, and it adds to their whole immigrants are ruining the country thing. But you never know. Something could break down. We've seen, from the Supreme Court on down, that some questionable decisions have been made as the courts have gotten more and more partisan. So who knows? So it's just something to keep an eye on. The other one is a done deal, and is extremely concerning. It's that he pardoned literally, well, I shouldn't say literally, there may be a couple, but I think if it's not all, it's almost all of the January 6th criminals. Anyone that was convicted of a crime, he commuted some sentences, which means they'll still have whatever the charge was. Whatever they were charged was will still be on the record, but their sentence, say it was a 10-year sentence, they're now free to go, and maybe they've only served 2 years of that sentence or whatever, or he's pardoned them, which means not only are they free to leave jail, but they won't even have whatever their crime was on their record. And, hey, maybe there's some, I obviously don't know every single case. There may be some folks who deserve to be pardoned or have their sentences commuted. I think there's an argument to be made that between everything that's happened to these people in their personal lives, there may be some who truly did just get caught up in the moment, didn't do anything violent, didn't break anything, didn't steal anything, and have, been charged with something that may have a punishment for several years. Maybe there's some people who that makes sense. But anyone who's committed violence, that's a harder case to make, especially those who have committed violence against police officers. And in those pardons, like I said, if it's not every single person who's been charged with something, it's most of them. And that includes all these violent offenders, including guys like Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers, which is his like fringe far right group. He was charged with seditious conspiracy. That's a hard thing to prove. You have to prove that he and his organization or whatever planned out an attack against the United States government in advance. And a jury of his peers decided he did. So that's like one of the people, the so and so cute, the so-called QAnon shaman, the guy who had like the bear head on him or whatever when he was in the Capitol. He's one of the people who has been pardoned. He took straight to Twitter to say, he's excited about it, of course, and he can't wait to go buy guns because now he has his gun rights restored. Another person that was released said that his next steps were to go home and regroup and start focusing on people on the local level. I forget his exact terminology, but it was, local dissidents or something. Basically, a veiled threat that they're going to go after, people on the local level of their government, whether that's city council, governors, mayors, whatever it may be. So all that is to say, I doubt there's anyone who committed any act of violence that day to deserve to be pardoned or commuted. Maybe there's someone, there's a case you can point to and it might make sense, but a lot of them, it does not make sense that you are letting these people go. And a commuted sentence is one thing where they still will have like a felony, on their record. But pardoning people, especially the violent people, they no longer have a violent crime on their record. And at least two of them, I think there was a third I saw too, in quotes to the media, are saying veiled violent threats, saying they can't wait to go buy guns, saying they're so thankful for Trump and they support him even more now. I mean, these are not people who learned their lesson. And these are violent criminals who are being sent back out into the country and could commit more acts of violence and claim they're doing it at the behest of the president, and they won't worry about it because he'll just pardon them. That's the lesson that comes here. That's why that may be the most dangerous thing he's done, in these first few days. And that's the one that's most concerning. And because there's so much going on and because so many people are trying to avoid the news right now, that's something you may have missed. And I just think that's reprehensible. And yeah, I'm sure there's criminals that other presidents. Well, I know there's other criminals that presidents have pardoned or commuted their sentences or whatever. And I'm sure there's some people who committed violence. So I'm not saying this is a Trump exclusive thing, but this is what happened this week. So that's why we're talking about it. And it's really sad, especially, the hypocrisy of it all. We can talk about how we were told that Biden and Harris let criminals just roam free in the streets and do whatever they want, and no one's ever held accountable. And then here we go, doing the thing that they said they hated Biden and Harris for doing. So there's that side of it, of course. And then there's the people who screamed for years after every arrest, after every conviction of January 6 rioters, that would. So, well, what about the Black Lives Matter protesters who, burned buildings or looted or whatever? And those people who were identified, at least, have been arrested, have been charged, have been sent to jail or whatever their punishment had been. They're not getting any commuted or pardons, commuted sentences or pardons. And of course, it depends on what crimes they were charged with and if they're federal or not. But the point remains that, it was always a whataboutism. Well, now, your quote unquote side, your violent people have been let free. So are you saying now that the people you don't agree with, they should be let free? Of course not. People who commit violent crimes, the vast majority of the time, don't deserve a pardon or a commuted sentence. And again, there's exceptions and we can get into the reasons why, but that's, not for today. So anyway, that is all that, not even all that is the things that jumped out to me the most. And that's a pretty big list. I've already taken up way more time than I intended. But there's so much other stuff that's already happened. And again, you can look into, the confirmation hearings and all the really concerning things that have come out of there, and typical politics stuff. And it's just that there's so much more going on. It's already not great, which is to be expected in the first week, again, with the flurry of executive orders and things. I mean, it's expected. It might quiet down, but come on, if this is a sign for things to come, it is not good. All right, enough of that, although I know we'll talk about some of these things more in the future. Now to local disappointing news. National Nancy Cash Me Outside Mace admits one of the worst kept secrets in South Carolina, which is that she is planning on running for governor. This has been something that has been talked about in many circles. This is no surprise. The only question is when Nancy Mace was going to run for governor. And even that wasn't that big of a surprise. Most assumed ASAP, which would be coming up, 2026, because Henry McMaster's term is ending. So there won't be an incumbent Republican, sometimes you don't want to run against an incumbent in your own party. So this makes sense. And she admitted it on the record. Again, one of the worst kept secrets in South Carolina politics. But yes, National Nancy said on Wednesday that she is, quote, seriously considering, end quote, a gubernatorial run in 2026 and will make a final decision in the coming weeks. If you ask me, that decision's already been made. Otherwise, she wouldn't have brought it up to the press. And unless there is some serious pushback within her own party, she doesn't care outside of that, of course. I'm not saying that, well, as a governor, you should care about all your residents. But anyway, unless there's some huge pushback or, internally, the decision's been made. She's going to run for governor. She said this in an interview with the Associated Press. There's a bunch of other stuff she talked about. A lot of it's nonsense. This was the big takeaway from it. And we've seen her fealty to Donald Trump, her going from, when January 6th happened and her talking down about it and talking down about Trump. And she's done a complete 180 and is now a Trump sycophant. We knew why, because she knew that this would advance her career, and she doesn't actually like Trump, although maybe she's convinced herself she does with how much she talks about it now. But another sign was that she's hoping that Trump will, she's going to ask him directly for his support. So she basically wants an endorsement from him. So even people who are like, not the biggest Nancy Mace fans might be big Trump fans. And so like, well, if Trump endorsed her, that means she's going to do the stuff that Trump wants. And that's what I want. So yeah, she said outright she's going to ask for his support, which again goes back to why she has just been, nonstop. I love Trump. He's the best. He's the greatest. Just debasing herself for this person. So that's the bad local news. That's going to be a whole thing. I don't know what else to say about it. I'm tired. And yep, no surprise. Not that I thought Nancy Mace was going to be going away in any capacity. She was either going to stay in her current role or maybe run for a Senate seat. I knew something was coming. It's still just like, can we just stop? Can we just put an end to this? All right, lastly, nothing to do with politics. Thousands of dollars in distilling equipment are currently at the center of a legal dispute between the now defunct Sweetgrass Vodka, its Charleston landlord, and the company that leased the equipment to Sweetgrass Vodka. This Sweetgrass Vodka story has been going on for months and months. I don't want to get back into it. We don't have time either. But basically, there's a lot of accusations of fraud, and the owner was possibly inflating the company's worth and wasn't paying people, and eventually it caught up. Again, this is all alleged. Nothing has been worked out in the courts. And there's all sorts of lawsuits going on out there. So that's kind of the gist of it. Well, there's a new lawsuit that was filed in Charleston County by a group called Alliance Funding Group. It's a California company that does more than $2 billion in equipment loans and leases, according to the Post and Courier. And they're going after Sweetgrass Vodka. The company's owner, Jared Swanger, no relation. My last name is Sanger. And the business's former landlord, which is the Refinery. They're going after for a breach of contract claim. The Refinery is that like multi-use building in downtown Charleston. It's had Sweetgrass Vodka, the Whale, which is a craft beer business, a Cleats, which is a restaurant, kind of like a sports bar restaurant, and of course the amphitheater where they've had all manner of concerts over the last few years. So why are they caught up in this lawsuit? Well, let's start with the obvious. The Alliance Funding Group is going after Swanger and his business. And they're alleging that he signed an agreement back in May of 2021 to lease equipment for his vodka distilling operations. And he signed off that he was going to make the monthly payment, which was $2,390 and some change. So despite him shutting down the business in April 28th of last year, and the Refinery, by the way, locking the doors behind him, and I'm assuming because payments weren't being made on the lease or what have you. Despite all that, the agreement was still in place. He has signed an agreement through February of next year, 2026. And the funding group still wants its money and equipment, of course. And so far, it has received neither, according to their lawsuit. As of November, when the lawsuit was actually first filed, Swanger had allegedly racked up an outstanding balance of over $59,000, along with interest. Per his contract, he's required to return the equipment if he defaults, which he has at this point. And the group also noted in the lawsuit it can require a residual 18% interest from the day of default per year. So he's still racking up interest on this whole scenario. So why is the refinery involved? The Sweetgrass Vodka wasn't their business. They didn't have any stake in it as far as that's come out. It was just someone who leased a space in this property. Well, they are brought into the suit because the funding group alleges the building landlord is holding the equipment to, quote, assert control, end quote, in the situation, possibly as collateral over Swanger. So they're alleging that they're holding this equipment in a way to, try to work out whatever legal arguments and issues they have with Swanger. And it's not their equipment, it's this group's, and it needs to be returned to them. And so they're being brought into this lawsuit. I would imagine their part of it might not turn out to be a big deal. But certainly by bringing them on board, it might move things a little quicker, and this company might be able to get their equipment back. About those payments, not so sure. So that Sweetgrass Vodka drama continues, and obviously these lawsuits are just getting going. So I'm sure this will come back up in the news as things move forward, and maybe there's settlements, maybe they go to court. I'll be sure to keep you updated. And mercifully, that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope if you made it this far, congratulations. I know it's not a lot of fun stuff. And like I said, I know a lot of you are avoiding politics stuff. I certainly don't blame you. But for those who wanted to hear some stuff they may have missed, or just wanted to hear someone kind of complain so they could commiserate, I appreciate you listening. Hopefully, we're certainly going to be talking about national things just like I always have on this podcast. But hopefully it's not an overriding theme, as we move forward. Hopefully it's, we don't have to talk about a lot of these types of things, but I'm not holding my breath. Regardless, I will still bring you Charleston news and information, even in episodes like this where they're dominated by national headlines. And of course, you can always go to holycitycenter.com, where it's all vast majority is all Charleston and Charleston area stuff. I'm not writing stories about national things. I'll share those on social media platforms, but it's not on the website, so you can avoid it there. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, whatever you can do to help this podcast, whatever platform you're listening on right now. Please interact with the podcast in any of those ways, and that'll help us out. Also, don't forget to get those nominations in for Best of Charleston. And I appreciate y'all. Stay safe and stay warm this weekend. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And of course, Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I will be back with you next week. I'm already looking forward to it. But until then, good night and good luck.